going on, guys? Welcome back to Before the Whistle. I'm your host, Maddy, and I believe we are back to our regularly scheduled content here on this show with, again, guest episodes coming out on Fridays and this episode dropping on Tuesdays as usual. With that being said, happy game week. I guess if you're a week 0 follower, and I know that happened, so it's not as if it was a fever dream or anything, but I'll admit I kind of just took last weekend off to get set for this season because the gas pedal starts on Saturday, September 2nd, and it does not come off last year until January. So keeping that in mind for myself, I did watch the Saints preseason game. I was going to look at the film and try to look at what to break down here, but to be honest, I don't think that there was really, I mean, if you're trying to kind of pick apart things at position battles that are 3 and 4 deep down the line, I think you could kind of get into the weeds of that. But did the Saints necessarily learn anything or make any decisions based off of last night? It's hard to say, especially with this new roster cut down from 90 to 53 all at once. I am kind of failing to see really what the large benefits of that are. I mean, it's a lot, probably more likely that you're able to pick someone up that you're looking at closely when everyone kind of hits the waiver wire and the open market at the same time. But in terms of watching teams and being able to prognosticate who's going to be starting the season, it's hard to see whether or not those guys at this point are getting, game tape to hit the transfer portal, for lack of a better term, if the team that they're on is really trying to evaluate them, or if they just kind of run out of playing their starters and that's kind of what's out on the field. Whereas when you had those kind of more measured cuts, I think you could see a little more of a picture, or at least you could definitively cut people out of said photo. You can't do that this year, and this roster cut is just seemingly going to be a nightmare. If anything, I think it's just a lesson in what expectations can be for the preseason. Yes, the Saints could have gone undefeated for the first time in the preseason. Obviously it matters, and I will say that was a very interestingly well-coached preseason game where D'Amico Ryan is not coming in quiet whatsoever. He has a hungry defense, and as a defensive person, I was kind of excited to watch that play going on their side of the ball. But, those decision-making things like bringing out Blake Groupie to kick when they would probably have gone for 4-1 in a game situation. And so it just really eventually becomes difficult to evaluate. I think you got a lot of the good, the bad, and the ugly of what you get out of a 4th-round rookie quarterback in Jake Haener. You saw a lot of good throws, and then unfortunately at the end of the game, he didn't make his case as easy to really sell. To me, every quarterback makes bad decisions. If it's something that becomes a trait of theirs and it's something to look out for, turnover problems weren't necessarily something I recall reading or seeing about Jake Haener. And again, it's the preseason. You're playing behind a line that would not make the starting team on any other NFL team at that point. I just kind of struggle to familiarize myself at that point with guys that are just really hopefully not going to see meaningful playing time on that line. And then again, you think about that Ian Book game where he played behind, a bunch of, for lack of a better term, people that were wearing street clothes earlier that day. And that's not to excuse everything and, decision-making in those situations, but just kind of thinking about that context, because it just takes me back to the Tulane 2021 season where if you ask me what the biggest problem on offense was, it was 100% the offensive line. I mean, that's really where the game starts and ends to me. And as much as we talk about Tajay Spears, replacing Tajay Spears, what the quarterback room is going to look like this year, to me, all of that really comes down to what you can do on the trenches on both sides of the ball. Again, for the Saints, I think you saw a lot of promise, probably the earliest out of an interior defensive rookie in Brian Breesy. I always screw that up. He has pass rush moves, and he's really fast for his size. And those are traits that you could coach moves into someone's repertoire, but you can't teach someone that big to move that fast to an extent. And so I think seeing those things was apparent enough on the broadcast. It's really the only position group that benefits from the broadcast view at times, because then you kind of look at Trevor Penning last game where broadcast view didn't really paint a good photo of him. And then when you saw the all 22, it really wasn't as bad as it initially seemed. And that's kind of the beauty of watching film and the curse of watching film, to be honest with you, and just kind of being able to walk yourself back from those stances. All that to be said, I'm kind of just waiting for the Saints to start the season, cut down the roster, and then you can kind of move on from there. And I would point you, to all of the great Saints beat writers that have been kind of predicting that roster for the last few weeks. I've just honestly kind of been focusing on getting my head back screwed on straight on doing a broadcast, writing a script, which just got sent to me by Corey Glore, and just kind of getting back into that game week rhythm, thinking of what days we meet with Willie Fritz, what days, I get injury information. Kind of just getting back into that this week has been great. And, getting a look at the depth chart for this weekend, which obviously I cannot share with you guys. But I think there's some general themes that I've talked about a few weeks in a row in the show, but I just as kind of a preview heading into the season, what I've learned throughout training camp, what, I've observed just sitting in on interviews. I sat down, Corey interviewed Willie Fritz for the podcast, The Current, that comes out, I believe, on Wednesdays. I'm sorry, Corey, if that's wrong. And I will keep most of that information for that. But, just kind of sitting in on those, talking to a few of the players after the scrimmage, after media day, and hopefully painting you guys the best picture possible of 2023 Tulane football. And trying to kind of come up with what to talk about on the show and provide something new that, isn't really beating a dead horse at this point, because we've kind of just slogged into that. I need to kind of see them play against a legitimate opponent in order to get any more evaluation, really, at least player trait wise, and seeing how they fill, those big holes on the roster. But I think when you talk about all of the questions surrounding the season, of can Tulane sustain the success of last year with all of the turnover, at all of the coaching staff and the players, to me, the biggest consistency is really the most important factor here. And it's the head coach. And that sounds obvious, but going back to doing that coaching series that I did on Before the Whistle over the offseason, it just continued to stand out how valuable a true good head coach really is. And obviously I'm biased here, and I have not been a sideline reporter for another football team. I would like to think that I've watched enough and followed enough football in my life. And, with my background in psychology, and I spent a lot of time working in human behavior, kind of being able to pick out the traits of what, I think is valuable in a head coach. And just kind of, again, sitting there today, I just realized that it all goes back to Willie Fritz here at Tulane. And it gives me an idea of measured confidence, just going back and looking through his coaching record, which I saw the stuff of Willie Fritz is the best coach you've never heard of last year, even though, again, for the people that are mostly listeners of this podcast, we all knew Willie Fritz just fine and well, but it came really to national spotlight, just how he's gone up the ranks from junior college to Division II, FCS, FBS. He's coached at every single level of college football. And you can scheme all you want and come in with these, new ideas, but you just can't make up that type of experience. But in looking what he's able to do at every single level of college football, again, Power 5 being the one rank that he has yet to reach, even though that was a very strong possibility this last offseason. But, becomes the head coach at Blinn Junior College in 1993. And I'm looking off to the side just so I don't get these numbers wrong. That was a team that had 5 wins in their previous 3 seasons. Willie Fritz goes there, their first season, they go 6-3. And then after that, 9-2, 12-0, and 12-0. And, that was 2 national junior college championships, inducted into the junior college, the NJCAA Football Hall of Fame for what he was able to do there. He then goes over to Central Missouri and has 11 winning seasons in 13 years. They have 2 10-win seasons, their first pro season trip in over 30 years. And 2002 was their first ever appearance in the NCAA Division II playoffs. The important thing to me is they followed that up the year later, being the co-champions of what I don't believe exists anymore, the Mid-America Athletic Association. And then Sam Houston, back-to-back FCS championships in 2011 and 2012, which are both the highest single season win totals in program history for them. But it really just kind of follows this pattern of coming in and building a winner. I read off that at Blinn College. He goes over to Central Missouri. He starts 5-6. Then afterwards, they go 8-3, 7-4, 2 seasons in a row, 10-2, 2 seasons in a row, 9-2. And then you finally get back down to 7 wins. But, that's a resume of winning seasons at this point. Then he goes over to Sam Houston. Their first year, they go 5-6. Then they go 14-1, 11-4, 9-5, 9-3, 8-4. Really, the only outlier is Tulane. Not so much the start. He comes in 4-8. They don't have that kind of miraculous turnaround until last season. They go 5-7, 7-6, 7-6, 6-6. And then 2-10 really does stick out. I just remember seeing Willie Fritz just look, kind of lost and flummoxed at times at the fact that this was really a level of losing that he just wasn't used to. And that really kind of honed it in for me, just looking at, and I encourage everyone to just go, it's on Tulane's, his coaching page on Tulane's website, just looking at those records year back to back. And again, sustaining success, building a winner, and then keeping that for several years running. And it just goes to show how much of an outlier and how much circumstances really played into that 2-10 season, and how much that to me is just the exception and not the rule here. Now, am I saying that they're going to repeat 12-2, go 14-0? Again, I have no idea, but I just think it's hard to ignore the resume of someone that has done this now at every single level, and it's not a flash in the pan at any level at that. And you look at the coaching staff that's been brought in. There's not a ton of familiar faces, but for one of the more important roles at offensive coordinator, Slade Nagel has been there since Willie Fritz's inception as head coach at Tulane. And then you think of the additions that they brought or the little changes. Derek Sherman, he was the running back coach last year, coached a hell of a player in Tajay Spears, but he was a wide receiver in college and primarily has coached wide receivers in the past. So I think it's safe to say that that's probably his natural role. And then you bring in Carter Sheridan, who spent time on the Saints coaching staff, spent time at LSU. And this is one thing I will steal from the podcast I sat in on with Corey and Willie, and I'm saving the rest for his episode. But it stuck out to me that he said that he uses Mickey Loomis kind of frequently as a reference. And why not? Again, they're right down the road. There's a lot of Tulane alumni in that building. And that's how you end up with coaches like Dan Rochar, Carter Sheridan. Say, Greg McMahon was his mentor. And so that didn't necessarily need an additional phone call, but most teams, especially, in G5, when you're talking about Georgia or Alabama, you're not necessarily having the same issue of turnover that you do at the G5 level. And you saw teams flirt with Willie Fritz and Michael Pratt last year, getting offers from Power 5 programs. But the fact that they were able to keep those two here, and then, I'm not to say that I'm hesitant, and I'm not going to use the word upgrade because I don't want to disrespect previous coaches. And the previous coaching staff took Tulane to a 12-2 Cotton Bowl win against the Heisman Trophy winner, 12-2 season, not 12-2 win. That game was 46-45. As again, I saw for myself on Saturday because I'm insane and I watched it again. But just again, seeing the fight that Tulane had. I remember at the AFCA Coaches Association, Willie Fritz was a speaker earlier this offseason. And, I was there with a different role, but I went in and sat in on his speech that he was giving. And they kind of went over his plan to win. And I guess you could kind of call these his 5 coaching principles, if you will. And just kind of going through them, again, with all the question marks that are there, I think philosophy and principle is really the most important thing. And that's all, again, derived from the values and philosophy of your head coach. And so going again from the bottom down here, I think by the time you get to the players, there's just such layers of a winning culture instilled here. But just to go through those again, because I took pictures of the slides just to have for memory bank, that's coming in handy now. Number 1 is take care of the football. So, win the turnover and takeaway margin. And that's something that I know is emphasized every single day there. You see guys jumping on loose balls and they have loose fumble drills. I remember there was a play during the Cotton Bowl that Josh Remitich jumped on and ended up being a dead ball, but just seeing how hungry he was for that. And then he actually told me that he ripped a fumble away from a defensive lineman one time. And just again, to hear that fight in these guys. But Michael Pratt, his turnover margin is incredibly low, not to mention that he's 10th in program history in rushing touchdowns at that. But you don't see kind of those fumbling issues of some of the running quarterbacks with bad ball security. And I keep going back to the other point that he made there, where all the pictures in the Wilson Center are deliberately picked players that are holding the ball with good ball security. They have a picture of Tajay up on the Jumbotron at Yeoman Stadium during practice with their coaching points on how to take care of the football. Just the attention to detail there. And then obviously the takeaway margin on defense and, winning the battle on special teams, which is, 0.3, but it's where a lot of turnovers can happen, especially with the ability of Tulane with Casey Glover to kick onside kicks the way that they have, when needed in the past. But you also think about Sheil Wood coming in, and Troy, I believe, had 27 turnovers last year, which is 8th in the FBS in total. And you can see that man coverage really tight ability to remain in phase by these cornerbacks and Cam Pettisflow there at nickel. And I went and kind of watched some of the old Raging Cajun games earlier today because it just sticks out to me how important of a late season addition he was. And you think about guys like Lummy Young, who came in and were able to really handle the defense and understand the system relatively quickly. I mean, he just immediately came in and filled a huge need at that nickel role. He also did play safety quite a bit, actually. I watched the Independence Bowl where they played the Houston Cougars, and you saw him kind of dropping back there several times. Versatility, I know, is something that Tulane really values in their secondary. They ran a ton of dime defense last year, and you have to have the defensive backs in order to really pull that off. But their base defense is primarily with that nickel back. They've always had those two linebackers out there. You saw some base defense last year. I think you're going to see kind of just more of a 4-2-5 this year, or whatever you want to call that. It's now the dog role. It was previously the joker on your defensive line. And, whether that's rushing a linebacker, and I guess you could technically call something a 3-4 or a 4-3, but I think you're really going to see that emphasis in the secondary out there, with 5 defensive backs relatively often, especially in this passing league. And having a guy that can play the slot is so important. And it's not a transferable skill set necessarily from cornerback that is really inherent or mentally, or even just the way that you're moving off the line of scrimmage. If you just go and watch a game and focus on the initial routes that are most of the time taken by those wide receivers lined out wide versus a slot receiver, a lot more crossing routes, a lot more traffic, a lot more lateral movement and lateral agility. You have to have fluid hips. You have to have lateral agility. You have to have really good short area quickness off that line of scrimmage, because you don't really have that much space to eat up with a cushion. You can play off coverage at slot, but a lot of those routes aren't going much farther than the coverage that you're allowing. And so being able to really react quickly to those things, you're in the box a lot of the time at that role. So being able to assist in run tackling and seeing the tackles for loss that he racked up over again on the Raging Cajuns, and just being able to be disruptive there. But I just kind of remember how important Macon Clark became to this defense last year, and the fact that he didn't play nickelback before that season. And I recall him struggling quite a bit during the spring because it is just such a nuanced position. I mean, looking at the Saints as an example, I'm someone that's really high on Alontae Taylor. I continue to be extremely high on him, but I had kind of hypothesized that he might be able to start in the slot, and it just hasn't been a smooth transition for him. He's clearly really made to have that, true press corner, backpedal in coverage and really hold your own down the field. And so sometimes you're trying to fit a square peg into a circle hole. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Really lucky for Tulane, that really worked for them, because you look at kind of the safeties that they bring back that have that experience in DJ Douglas and Bailey Despaney, who played a decent amount of time for Tulane over the last couple of years. Asking one of them to go move up to nickelback, it's probably a really tough ask. And then, who kind of fills that safety role? And again, without giving away depth chart stuff, being able to kind of keep the guys that have the experience at the roles that they do at said roles is a lot easier than trying to kind of solve multiple problems. And so that's a really big thing for Tulane, and just the way that he's built and the way that I've seen him tackle with force. A lot of running backs he brought down in the film that I watched on him. And again, just having that guy that's in the box. And I'll be curious to see, though, if they kind of blitz anyone out of there, because that was something that Macon Clark was really good at. But you have an entirely, again, new defensive system. You have a new defensive line coach. You have a new defensive coordinator who's also serving as your linebacker coach. You have someone that's specifically assigned to that anchor role. And you have JJ McCleskey coming back as kind of that, and Josh Christian Young, those assistants that have been here for a while, but a lot of turnover and a lot of new players. And so it's going to be, to me, extremely interesting, but it just goes to show you the value of coaching. And just the fact that guys have already said that they can ask Shieldwood any question about the defense, and he can answer, again, what the defensive line is supposed to be doing, what safety is supposed to be doing, how they're supposed to drop back into coverage or come down in the box. And the fact that he is a new coach just says so much to me. But it's really going to be, it's a different mental battle this year. Last year to me was kind of the psychology of believing in yourself when no one else does, because you're ultimately trying to instill this idea that you're going to the conference championship. Again, the players could probably see that, but you're still coaching a team that came off of 2 wins the year prior, one against an FCS team. And so how you kind of handle those day-to-day things is probably a level of just, again, that emotional management that's required when you're talking about college players. These aren't NFL guys that are making millions of dollars where a losing season might suck, but doesn't really affect their bottom line. Again, with NIL and your draft position, everything matters in college. Just on it feels like a much more unique level than it does in the pros. And that includes kind of the psychology of coaching to me. This year, you're kind of having to coach a lot of guys that have to step into these big shoes to fill and try to kind of forget about the guys that were there before. And kind of myself included. There's only so much that we can do about the guys that were there last year. Tajay was amazing. Nick and Dorian, amazing. But the fact is they're gone. And so how are the new people looking? And, should it be kind of fair to place that weight on their shoulders? I think it'll be kind of curious to see who those defensive leaders are. I think you're seeing it in a lot of those senior guys, Jarius Monroe, Lance Robinson, just kind of as those immediate characters. But that is a void that they're going to have to fill. Playing wise, however, you have linebackers that each have over 300 snaps in Corey Platt and Jesus Machado. Tyler Grubbs coming in is just a really key thing for that unit as well. And so just to do this whole kind of roundabout on all this, going into South Alabama, that's kind of coaching point one that I got way away from on kind of Willie Fritz's plan to win, if you will, of take care of the football. But when I start talking about defense, I tend to get a little bit sidetracked. Talking about Tajay, though, and replacing him and this kind of idea, the second thing that was on, Coach Fritz's plan to win is controlling the running game and winning the rushing battle. And they're facing a good and experienced running attack in South Alabama with a pretty good run defense with a lot of returning starters, especially kind of up that interior. And again, you have those question marks of who's going to replace Tajay Spears and in what way. And it wouldn't surprise me to see one guy who is kind of that pass protection guy, one guy who you can really kind of split out wide in an empty back formation and use him as more of a receiver in the way that we saw Tajay, and who's going to be that horse of that every load back. You might not necessarily ever see that at Tulane this year, because it's not, again, Tajay Spears was almost kind of the anomaly and less of the rule, I think, of what Willie Fritz has done with essentially running back by committee. The third one was great special forces, winning the kicking game. Again, talking about bringing in Greg McMahon is just, it can't be understated. The fact that he's been on a staff that won a Super Bowl on the Saints and a national champion in LSU. And Willie keeps saying he believes that is a record, and it would be hard to research that, but I'm kind of inclined to agree with him. But you think about the experience of the guys on KPS and Casey Glover, Valentino Ambrosio, and Ethan Hudak, the seasons and time they've had together. I know Val is a new addition, but again, when I went to Tulane, Cairo Santos was the kicker, and that was kind of the one sure thing about Tulane football. And I think Valentino Ambrosio is kind of the best kicker since, unless I'm forgetting anyone, and I do sincerely apologize. But the fact that you're comfortable with 40 to 50 yarders from a guy in college just makes such a difference in making decisions on offense, making decisions on, whether to punt, whether to go for it. And having Casey Glover, who serves as a punter and the kicker and has improved at all of those, also be the placeholder, and that having that second season under their belt now. And my guy, Ethan Hudak, who Willie Fritz did say today, should be seen as one of the best long snappers in America because of the blocking and the downfield abilities he has. He's not just short and long snapper. He's also out there on special teams, and he does have a fumble recovery. Shout out Ethan Hudak on that stat sheet. Those guys are an extremely important part of the game. I continue to go back to that Southern Miss loss. It was a 3-point loss that you could argue could have been decided by special teams. I go back to the Cotton Bowl, where if they miss a field goal, to Valentino Ambrosio makes a really important one that almost kind of gets lost in the craziness of all this. The ball gets fumbled out at the 1-yard line, and USC has no special teams coordinator. So that, to me, is just a clear upgrade with the familiarity and then adding on Greg McMahon. Wave don't beat the wave. That's pre-snap and post-play penalties. Obviously, you can't tell until you get to the game, those types of things, but the attention to detail every single day of making sure these guys hand the ball to the referees, including in practice. And I have talked about that, but making sure they finish every play out, it's just to get those mental reps in. And pre-snap penalties, most of the time when you're on offense, are false starts, and then holding. And most of the time that comes from poor play on the offensive line. Just looking at the Saints, They really cleaned up the penalties last game, but the week before there were 14 penalties for 141 yards, and the majority of those were holding and false starts on offense. And there is nothing that kills a drive more than, back-to-back false start and holding penalties. And all of a sudden you're looking at 2nd and 35, and that just completely screws you up. So the fact that they have 4 of those returning starters who, again, they only had one person change that lineup last year in Josh Remitich, and he returns now with Prince Pines and Sincere Haynesworth and Rashad Green. And then you add on Cameron Wire, and he played enough time at LSU for, me to be comfortable. And again, it's just ultimately replacing one position on a line that has played a lot of meaningful football together. That is extremely important. And then you have probably one of the more experienced quarterbacks going on in college football right now in Michael Pratt. And Tulane has not had a quarterback like Michael Pratt in a long time. And I think that's something ultimately that fans can really get excited for heading into this season. I just keep going back to the Cotton Bowl drive. There's nothing else you could say about 1 minute left, no timeouts, being down both starting tight ends, losing Deuce Watts at wide receiver, trusting the tight end and Alex Bauman on both 4th and 10 and to make that game-winning touchdown, and using his legs really smartly when he needed to. Again, being the 10th highest in rushing touchdowns for Tulane with 23, you almost kind of forget about that because he's just improved his game in the air so much. And I think you're going to see a lot of speed out of the wide receiver room this year. But I keep going back to the Kansas State game where, I think Michael Pratt wants to be a pass first quarterback. And, the fact that he told me way back in spring that he watches Drew Brees on tape has not left my memory at all, because that is one of the least mobile and most cerebral and least physically gifted quarterbacks that you could really look at. And so then you look at Michael Pratt, who is just built at 6'3", 2, whatever, he's a really big guy out there and is able to take those hits and able to run the way that he does. Looking at someone like Drew Brees, who, is 5'11" on a good day, I guess, 6 feet and just a lot smaller in stature. And yes, he was a lot more mobile in the pocket earlier on in his career, but didn't have straight line speed like Michael. And that plays into your decision-making. I know there's this whole thing with our rushing quarterbacks, a blessing or a curse in the NFL in terms of injury and their development. But I really think that is the final progression in his reads a lot of the time. But I think where you saw him use his legs the most was that Kansas State game. And you go back to the fact that they often rush 3 and drop 8 into coverage. That is like the worst pass defense to pass against possible. And, I think he threw 1 or 2 interceptions earlier in that game. He didn't falter. He didn't panic, and he used his legs very smartly. Yeah, that was kind of the game plan going in there, but a lot of quarterbacks want to be the hero, and they want that really game-winning 74-yard touchdown on their resume. But the fact that Michael's just willing to pick up those short yardage with his legs, he's willing to take those dump-off passes and those short tosses to, his running backs and go with a team that ultimately has that kind of 50-50 run philosophy. As much as, more of a passing offense gets you a better resume, I think if you look at the teams that succeed and the teams that fail in the NFL, ones with a balanced rushing attack are on the former side of that equation on who succeeds. And again, the fact that it opens up the passing game. I remember watching the Titans game to watch Tajay Spears in the preseason, and it was like the Tennessee Tajays at first, where they handed it off to him, 15 times. And that was honestly probably an understatement, but all of a sudden they were able to kind of make these plays in the air that they weren't before, because they had really had to stack the box and respect the run game. And that's really what that comes down to. And so just having a quarterback back there that you have to think twice about when the Saints had their quarterback battle between Taysom Hill and Jameis Winston. Again, one of the points I brought up, just again, the fact of Taysom Hill, they're not able to just drop that safety back. You have to have guys up there with size, and for the fact that that quarterback might take off, and he is really quick in doing so. And that changes how you game plan as a defense. I just look at how John Rice Plumlee, single-handedly dismantled the Tulane defense in UCF's win against them last year. And yes, he was hurt in the championship game, but that was really kind of the end-all be-all, was containing John Rice Plumlee. And so having those legs in someone like Michael Pratt, having the time that he's had, this first year of real consistency for him with an offensive coordinator that was the same as the previous season, that'll be a first for him going into this year. And that brings me to kind of my last bullet point of Willie Fritz's coaching principles. The last one was finish, win the fourth quarter. If you ask the guys from last year, that's something that is in them in spades from the Cotton Bowl. But again, you bring in these new guys. Are they able to have that kind of mentality? I think you draw all of your mentality from leadership. And that's why I've really emphasized Willie Fritz's leadership at the top, how that translates down to the position groups and how they're really able to handle each group as their own separate unit. But the quarterback is the one that the entire team is looking to. And I just don't think that you could find a better leader who's gone through more on and off the field that one can really imagine. Just again, looking at all of the logistic nightmare that 2021 season brought, and then he stayed around, and that paid off in dividends for him last year. And, rather than kind of go depart for greener pastures, sure, he could have been starting at a Power 5 school this season. He chose to stick with Tulane. And I think that's really what Tulane fans can get excited about is, again, just having that real quarterback and the fact that that's what is going to win and lose you games at the end of the day. If Caleb Williams had more than 7 seconds on the field, the Cotton Bowl could have probably gone a lot differently in that final few minutes. But ultimately, the quarterback that was last on the field was the one that, I mean, that's not technically correct, but, had the last meaningful drive on the field, won that game. But you have to be able to execute it. And was that a tough drive in terms of getting sacked, I believe, twice, having a ball batted down at the line of scrimmage, 2 fourth down conversions. Again, 1 minute left, no timeouts. If you don't convert here, the game is over. You guys are losing. You have that mentality in Michael Pratt, and you saw it in Oklahoma. And I just think it's only grown stronger as it's kind of gone on. But you can handle issues at running back if you have a good quarterback. If you have a quarterback that can get the ball out quickly, you can handle an injury on the offensive line or two. One that can adjust routes to his tight ends. And then, it also, not that he can really contribute on defense, but if the defense starts out with slightly less of a roar this year, it ultimately is the one with more points on the board, and you can get the most of that out of your quarterback. And the fact that him and Sincere Haynesworth have been working together since Michael Pratt came to the school, and that he was out there for his first start when he came in halfway through the game against Southern Miss in 2020. And I just remember talking with Sincere Haynesworth at media day and asking him about, is there a different style that you guys have for each running back this year? Or what's kind of the weight on your guys' shoulders in replacing Tajay Spears? And that might be a weird question to ask the center, but just again, and he really said that's, to him, the beauty of offensive line play is everyone has to be on the same page or nothing goes right. And the best way to do that is to make it easy for those guys to hit their holes, keep your gaps, and keep that gap integrity going. And having, again, a unit that has so much playing time and experience together, being able to play in concert, it gives you the ability to try out those guys and feel like you're getting a good evaluation of them, and not one of, for Shedro Lewis, for example, he comes over for Liberty. I haven't had a chance to watch their tape, but just the way that he plays here, I'm inclined to say that this is going to be an upgrade for him for an offensive line. And he might really be a dark horse that comes out and really just makes a rumble for Tulane. But all it takes is that one hole. And whether it's the quarterback or the running back, as long as your offensive line is able to create that and create a pocket, give him time. Thankfully, you have wide receivers that are basically all track stars at this point in Dante Fleming, Keith Brown, Jaquan Jackson, Lawrence Keys. Chris Brazel's extremely fast. Garrett Mamahat has come on as a very quick wide receiver as well, and having the timing there to be able to pull those things off. But to me, Tulane is deepest on both sides of the ball in the trenches. And that is where I'm going to kind of rest my case on the most important thing heading into this year is your head coach, your quarterback, and your trenches. You have guys that, I think there are 9 players on defense that, have played in at least one game and meaningful game time at that. Losing Adonis Freelu last year, guys had to really suddenly step in and not really kind of be prepared for those roles. Now you have Adonis Freelu coming back, and you didn't, really lose a lot of guys to graduation. You didn't lose guys to the transfer portal like they did the year prior with Jeffrey Johnson. And having depth up at your trenches, if you're able to get to the quarterback and pressure the quarterback, again, that's where the game starts and ends. And I think that you guys are going to be in for a surprise with just a very hungry defense, one that knows that they are really stepping into some big shoes here. And I think that they probably feel it a little more than the offensive side of the ball. But I just, think about, again, that 1-0 mentality, beating South Alabama, that's all in these guys' mind right now. But, with training camp being kind of what it is and scrimmages no longer being a thing and not wanting to give away depth chart information, there's only really so much to kind of go back and forth here on. But, I could go down the schedule and say this might be a win, this might be a loss. But I just think philosophy and culture are what sustain success the most, including a good college quarterback helps you a hell of a lot. And Tulane has all three of those things. And I think that you're going to see them all three on display in South Alabama. And that's really all I got, y'all. Again, I think Tulane is going to make a statement this year, coming in ranked in both preseason polls for the first time in program history. There's a lot of firsts going on here, but I think the one that's really kind of at the top of everyone's minds is, are they able to kind of hold on to the first and greatest single season turnaround in college football history? I think that I'm pretty confident that they'll be able to do just that. But a really important part of that is home field advantage. And to see these games be selling out, the single games, just like rapid fire, UAB is almost sold out. I believe there's a few tickets left for the opener. If it's not at this point, Ole Miss is sold out. Homecoming is sold out. And people, I believe, are going to be a lot more like what we saw at the championship game in terms of crowd noise than what we've seen of Tulaneans of season past. And if not, I will certainly be on the sideline encouraging people to be loud on third down. But, that kind of stuff really matters. And just, having a team to be excited about and get behind going in to the year and seeing how, the welcome to Tulane class of 2027, the university side of things has really leaned on the success of the football program. I think you're really, again, seeing Tulane genuinely lean into football success, kind of being a driving force of a university and a program in general. And that's something that's really important for them to be able to sustain this year as well. But, it's hard to do that without keeping your head coach. Well, Tulane did that. It's hard to do that losing your quarterback. Tulane did that, or did not lose either of them. You lost guys to the NFL that you weren't otherwise going to get back next season. There's nothing you can do about those voids, but the questions that they've been able to keep. And when you look at the 1998 year, all of the coordinators and coaches that departed, that is not really going on here. And you have investments into things that will immediately improve, the play and the health longevity of the players. As many times as I talk about the turf, I will keep bringing it up because it is such an important thing for these guys that spend just an astonishing amount of time out there in this weather, being able to have that a really good playing surface. And it just goes to show that, again, the little details matter and they're being paid attention to at Tulane. And I obviously have not been there under other coaching regimes or other points in history, but I think when there's this much attention being paid to what's going on behind the scenes, what you see on the field is really a product of that. And the only surprise will be, I think, that whoever ends up, being the next running back at Tulane, that's really the only surprise I see out of them. And season projections aside, I'm just looking forward to having some real football to analyze and be able to break down and, have a guest on this week to preview South Alabama, the season opener, again, Saturday, September 2nd, starts at 7:00 p.m. Our pregame coverage on 104.1 The Spot will start an hour earlier at 6 p.m. That includes interviews from head coach Willie Fritz, some players going in there, and just our pregame breakdown of myself, Corey Glore, and Steve Barrios. And I am just really looking forward to getting back into things, despite the temperature of what's going on outside, and covering what I think is the most anticipated Tulane season in the 21st century and probably, since the 1998 year. So with that, I will see you guys on Friday on Before the Whistle.